Watch this. No way!
Hello and welcome back to an EGM, another episode of the Cookie Jar Golf Podcast. I am Tom Mills. Today I'm joined by Bruce Fitzpatrick.
Good evening.
And Sam Williams.
Thanks for having me on. Sorry I haven't got my mic, fellas.
2 out of 3 without proper microphones is probably a first, isn't it, at Cookie Jar? I feel like we've really...
It's the worst audio performance since we got going.
I think not since the halcyon days of the pilot have we done so poorly with audio.
Even then we liked. Anyway, let's dive into it. We've got more pressing topics before we've got to get this cleared before we can look forward to our Christmas party on Friday, Thomas.
Will we call
what
this
are we
an
here
EGM?
to discuss? It's not an emergency podcast, is it? You rang me in the car on the way back and said, is it that big a deal? I should have said, yeah, I think this is a really big deal.
Okay. So, the RNA and the USGA have announced the new regulations of the ball. It's universal, not bifurcated, which is probably not what everyone was expecting, was what was leaked last week. So, give us a top line, somebody. Pith.
Right. So, without having... being in the office earlier today, I didn't know whether this was televised or there was a formal kind of press release on it that accompanied it. Obviously, there's a bit of Q&A as well, all quite carefully managed as you'd expect on the communication front from the RNA and the USGA. But essentially, I think the top line is they have changed the overall distance standard, so the ODS, which is the way they basically measure the golf ball or judge a golf ball to be conforming or not conforming. And what they've done is they've raised the club head speed from 120 miles an hour to 125 miles an hour, so that overall distance standard, that ODS of 317 yards, has to be achieved at 125 miles an hour rather than 120, which was the last time the standard was changed 20 years ago. So what does that mean in practical terms? Well, it means that if you're testing that distance limit at a higher speed, then it follows that at the top end of the game, you're going to have a reduction in distance, and that's going to trickle down as well to people with slower swing speeds.
Pretty clear, I think. One thing so diving into it a little bit deeper, they've actually changed the launch dynamics as well.
Yes,
which was interesting. So the testing has gone up to 125 miles an hour, as you said, to give a ball speed of 183 plus or minus 3, and a spin rate of 2.2, which has dropped from a spin rate of 2.5. Right, let's break that down a smidge. If you bring the spin rate down from 2.5 to 2.2, how does that affect carry and flight?
So the carry is going to go up to a point. I should stress there will become a point where you don't have enough spin on the ball; it'll just nosedive out the air. In fact, we saw Sam hitting a few of those last week at the tightest fitting up.
It's a real problem. It's a genuine thing, because you're always trying to. That's the sweet spot in fitting for modern day clubs, isn't it? Balancing spin with launch, because spin keeps it in the air, launch it's being powered through the air.
Yeah, and you don't want excess spin, because that just aerodynamically that's going to slow the ball down. And while it's obviously very useful with short game shots, with wedges, with approach shots, with a driver, you really want to launch it high with a spin around about 2,000.
So they've kind of then, by introducing 125 with 2.2 spin 11 degrees from 120 with 2.5 spin at 10 degrees, there actually is even that sort of spin dynamic is actually taking off a little bit more again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it would have traveled that a little bit further at 2.2 than it would have at 2.5.
Yes, correct. As I mentioned earlier, like that club head speed measure, it's really the formula behind the overall distance standard. I think the overall distance standard is around about 320 yards, might be 317 yards.
317, yeah.
Picking, yeah, exactly. But the last time it was the formula that underpins it, that 120 mile an hour figure was arrived at 20 years ago. 120 miles an hour off a centered strike, you would think that would give you about 176 miles an hour of ball speed, which is surprising because, granted, they didn't have TrackMan, they didn't have, a lot of the launch monitor data that we have nowadays. But 20 years ago, getting 176 miles an hour ball speed doesn't seem like there are many guys doing that. Whereas now, there's plenty of guys who are in the 180s, and that's what 125 miles an hour as a upper limit to test that reflects that. It's about 183 miles an hour ball speed off a centered hit.
So
wow.
reading from the press release from the RNA today, what is interesting, so like you say, there wasn't a whole ton of guys doing it when the last time it was introduced. Analysis of ball, so I'll read this directly. An analysis of ball speed amongst golf's longest hitters in 2023 show the fastest 10 players had an average ball speed of 186, while the average ball speed was 183. The very fastest are averaging 190 ball speed, which kind of, that's over what their testing tolerance is for anyway right now. So yeah.
I guess we've got plenty of space to debate and discuss this. Trying to put a bit of structure around this. How do you want to do this, Tom?
I feel like I'm the one in charge.
I guess there are concerns and there's challenges, and then there are positives, and then there's probably a debate that goes on and around that, because loads of topics like bifurcation to try and unpick and sort of see where this is. I think what I would say at the very outset of this is highly nuanced stuff. This will have different outcomes for people at very different ends of the spectrum of golfers, right? So I think to expect everyone to be unilaterally supportive is probably a bit optimistic.
Yeah. So first of all,
sorry, Tom, do you want to carry on?
No, you go ahead, Bruce.
I was just going to say maybe it is worth, as you rightly point out there, Sam, there's a lot of nuance. Maybe it is just worth trying to point out the facts, headline facts and points and the data as best we can, because I think a lot of this is getting lost. It's quite, the one thing we can say at this stage is that this has been anticipated for at least a week, certainly a good few days over the weekend, and I think there's been quite a bit of vitriol that's built up online from what you can see about these proposed changes. So
it starts in March, doesn't it? It starts in March with an announcement from the RNA and the USGA, and I actually joined that press conference, like a Zoom, and it was interesting that didn't come through. So either we've been dropped from the invite list, or it was significantly tightened up. I don't know. We'll come on to that in a second. But March, the announcement that was that we'd go to a model local ruling, which would essentially mean that to tackle distance at an elite level, something would be put in place. And they were using this terminology around the ODS back then, talking about 125. They actually tried to push it to 127 miles per hour. Right, that got pushed back from the equipment manufacturers. And, then it was pending sort of whenever the RNA and USGA were going to announce it. Then last Friday, Golf Digest released an article, which was obviously, off the back of some leak, presumably from an equipment manufacturer, that then suggested what we were going to hear, which is pretty much a carbon copy of what was presented today. I don't think there was anything there that was a surprise based on the Golf Digest. That led to Rory sort of, I think, opening up on Twitter and saying, well, the reason this is now applying to everyone and it's not going to be a bifurcated rule, i.e. this will be the same for amateur and professional golfers alike, is because when this was announced as a model local rule, which means tournaments could selectively implement it, but it wouldn't mean anything for the amateur golfer, there was a lot of pushback because people wanted to play the same equipment across the board for all players of every standard. And that's what's led to what is arguably a much more impactful decision with what they've announced today. Is that fair?
So yeah, beautifully summarised there, Sammy. Yeah, very good.
Thank you, Bruce.
I think I think the one little thing I'd just add there is that it seemed like Rory McIlroy came out and with a very impassioned defence of the governing body's decision on like Saturday or Sunday, or whenever it was, because I think there was already there was a kind of growing tide of like emotion that was extremely negative and was looking ahead to this decision that we've obviously heard in final form today. that was very, very negative. So Rory almost just it seemed like he felt compelled to go in and actually just even up the debate somewhat. But let's look at the facts. So what are the facts?
Have you
Have
you guys seen the South Park episode called Human Centipede?
You love that episode. You bring everything back to that episode.
It's
You
basically
signed this. You signed this.
It's basically like a take on the terms and conditions, and like because no one reads the terms and conditions, and then you've signed it, and then Apple can do literally whatever they want with you because you've signed the terms and conditions. I feel like Rory, when it came out, was like, "Well, you asked for this. You asked for this, and this is what you've got. You're all imbeciles. We don't play the same. We don't play the same kit anyway. But you're desperate for it, and now you've got it. So fuck off."
He's right. I think he's right. I think he's right. So I mean, you mentioned evening up the point count there a little bit, Bruce. I suppose, what do we know? What are the facts? Well, we know that Cookie Jar ran an Instagram poll today, and we know that 71% of people seem to be in some level of support or positive sentiment, and the rest weren't. What I would say is that we have an audience that is hugely sympathetic to this, I would say, much more than if you go and do an observational review of just, USGA comment section on Twitter and Instagram, and you start fishing through different tweets with high levels of comments. What I would say is the comments are largely negative. I mean, let's face it, people leave bad reviews about restaurants. They rarely leave mediocre reviews about restaurants. So, social media will no doubt come onto it. But there were a number of different sort of sticking points that people raised, or challenges about that. So I don't know, do we want to cover those first and then maybe look at some of the benefits from it?
I think we need to cover like what the actual facts and the data say, though, which really, correct if I'm wrong, at the top end of the game, the RNA and the USGA are suggesting that elite players who hit the ball, very hard with a high club head speed out the center of the face are going to lose somewhere between 9 and 11 yards.
Would you like some numbers on this?
Go ahead, Mills. I was just
Do you have the numbers, or do you want me to?
No, I was team.
Well, according to the USGA, which they've kindly released a little chart, which they've branded at the bottom saying "for the good of the game," which I thought was a nice touch. Average elite males swing it around about 106, and for that 106, the impact will be 9 to 11 yards. Correct. The average elite female swings it at 90. It looks like it's on a moving chart, but it looks around about 94. And for the 94 loss, they'll lose 5 to 7 yards. Mm-hmm. That's with, obviously, these are all with driver. I imagine they're not even contemplating what happens with the irons. The average male amateur, the AMA, which they like to call it, swings at about 92, and they will lose 3 to 5 yards. And the average female amateur swings it around about 72, and they will lose 1 to 3 yards. So what is strange, I think, from coming from the USGA, when I looked at this, because they provide two little charts, which I'm sure we can stick in a note somewhere, is there's literally like 1 mile an hour difference between the average elite female and the average male amateur. But they seem to think there's like a drastic change in, like, one is 5 to 7 yards, one is 3 to 5 yards. I don't know why that would be, whether it's that they just hit it better, and they just get less spin. I don't know why that would be a big change, but there seems to be like a kind of an S-shaped curve, which I wouldn't.
The drop off's not proportional, is it?
No, it's not. It's not linear.
So you'd imagine if you were losing 15 yards at the very top end, the person who's losing 7.5 yards is swinging it half as hard, and that's not as true. So it's not true at all. So there's obviously, that's where spin characteristics and balls and stuff will start to come into at lower swing speeds too. So it tapers off, is what you're saying, Tom. So,
well, yeah, I mean, this looks like it should be like it looks like a curve, which is kind of a ramping up. It gets more aggressive the harder, the faster you swing. So the faster you swing, the rate of change changes. If you swing even faster again, you'll even get even greater losses. The upshot of that being, for ordinary people, we're really not going to see a huge difference. I mean, the variance here, we're talking of middle strikes of being like, I know you boys swing it quite hard, but 5 yards on a drive. I mean, my variance on my drives is like fucking 40 yards anyway. I would never know, I would never know.
And that's what I found so amazing about all of this is the comment section, which is not a good place to go. I don't really do it, very often, and I'm quite disappointed myself. I did it on this occasion, but the comment section is just so full of delusion, on these posts, because it's people just say, "Oh, I'm going to lose so much distance," or I only hit the driver 225 yards. Like, this is going to make a big difference to me. It's like, no, mate, if you only hit the driver 225 yards, like, you need to hit it more out the center, and you need to. There's low hanging fruit for you. You need to stop slicing it. You just need to go out and have a look in the mirror and just fix your own game.
Look in the mirror. This is a scratch golfer preaching. Brilliant.
But it is.
There's no hanging. Well, they're not going to be impacted by this. I think would be the overriding sentiment. Is they're not going to be losing 5%. Is the point Tom was making there? They're going to be losing a much smaller percentage because their swing speed is lower.
Well, here's a stat, because I dug around because I was thinking, I wonder, I'll have a little. I've gone back to my old days and dug about stats, because that's a place where I like to live. According to TrackMan data, the average male golfer club head speed is 93.4 across all male golfers, all handicaps. Do you know what the average? Do you know what the average total yardage is for an average male that swings at 93.4?
Something like 220, 225.
226. Now, how many people did you go, oh yeah, 300-yard drive? Yeah. I was like, no, you don't, mate. No, you absolutely do not. Yeah.
Well, there is a complete delusion with it. But I mean, look, you go in the comment section, and this is where, I think doing a bit of research to this, Bruce, you're on the ODS and whatnot. And, I couldn't resist a good sort of ferret around on social media ahead of this. I had to scroll pretty hard on the USGA before I got to anything that was mildly positive, I'll be honest. So, there's no point pretending this has been well received. Much as I personally think they've got to do something, and whilst there's other things that I think they could go after that'd be more exciting, I think you've got to keep in mind that the governing bodies have got to govern for everybody that plays the sport. They're not there solely to represent the interests of the elite players or the professional tournaments. Yes, they have to have a good working relationship with the manufacturers and the tours, but they've also got to understand things from a grassroots perspective as well.
I would also.
So this is a really difficult thing. So it's really easy for us to sit here and go, yeah, I'd love to see us reduce the driver head size to 300 cc's, or go back to persimmon, or go back to a really high spinning ball where it becomes really difficult to do it. But you've got to be careful, because the more you go down that route, that's where golf becomes a very inaccessible game, because your time from starting playing golf to being able to play 18 holes with any level of enjoyment is massively elongated. So I think there's like two really big ends of the spectrum you've got to think about if you're a governing body here.
Yeah, you don't want to make the game so hard that it becomes inaccessible. The problem with that argument is, though, it's already pretty bloody hard, and how much of it is like changing the real nature of the game. I think you kind of alluded to it there, Sam. Maybe going after driver heads, which is something they've hinted they may do in the future, would be more problematic, because if you make the tool that you're hitting the ball with smaller, are you going to make it hard, therefore less accessible for people who are just getting into golf? Good question. But on this point, I really don't think it should be as controversial as it has been, because we're talking about very, very small changes to hitting distances for the vast majority of golfers. And handicaps haven't come down. Like, there's so much data out there that points to the fact that, like, people's playing ability in this game has not gotten better, despite all this modern tech that we now have. It's like, that makes no sense. Granted, the top end of the game, the depth of like high quality elite amateurs and obviously the professional tours, the talent pool there is a lot deeper, and the scoring average is probably lower, and that's fair. But the beginner and the average golfer has not gotten appreciably better in the last 20, 30 years. So where is the concern coming from?
So I've got a few questions in here, and I've tried to put them into, so based on all of the negative sentiment, I've tried to pull them into 4 different areas. And I'm going to throw the questions or the points out to you, and we can sort of hammer it out. We'll try and sort of be pithy with how we do it. So I guess point 1 that comes through loud and clear is, why solve a problem that doesn't exist for 99.99% golfers? For me, that's just like the whole point about bifurcation. and why we didn't end up with it, right?
Yeah.
But I don't follow. Why is I don't
So,
understand
so there would be a really fair argument with this that yes, 99% of golfers are not finding the game easy and do not need to have distance come off, however how small it is. If anything, they need to maybe play from tee boxes further up, or need a little bit more help, or need equipment that helps them get the ball in the air. However, when something was positioned that put forward a model local rule, that was knocked back. So, that for me, when people say, why are we doing this? Why are we solving a problem that only exists for the marginal high end of the game? For me, it is back to your, human centipede argument, Tom, with South Park, right?
You asked for this, yeah. But however, I would say, like, you could take 1 yard off everybody's drive and you are making the game harder. Like, there's no getting around that, Like, this will impact the average golfer. Might not very much, but it does make it harder. And you know what it's like. If someone goes and plays Turnberry or the old course or whatever, everybody goes to the back tees. It's like there's no sense in this world where it's like, oh, I'm just going to play this forward and enjoy my day. Like everyone wants to like sodomize themselves and just make it as hard as physically possible. No one's going to be moving up tees because of this, And I think that's where the problem lies, is we've taken 1 or 2 yards off, but people won't creep forward,
But surely that's a personal failing. If we're saying
Of course it is.
Let's give a golf ball that the average amateur golfer can go and use and get round the championship tees of an Open or a US Open course. So how can that work at the top end of the game as well?
Look, of course it is. But the equipment manufacturers would find it very difficult to sell loads of Pro V1s if they weren't playing Pro V1s on tour, or TP5s, or Chrome Softs. If they weren't the number one ball on tour, it's a bit harder to sell it, isn't it? I would imagine. And I think that for the equipment manufacturers, for us, we want to play this. We want to be able to play the same course as Rory McIlroy and say, oh, I shot 25 over and he did 25 under. Look at the difference. Isn't that brilliant?
But that's the only way this works.
So
exactly. So when people say it's a problem that doesn't exist, though, it's got to be really clear. We're looking at Gordon Sargent playing Walker Cup, cruising in inverted commas in the 190s with his ball speed. And Mike Clayton has told us on more than one podcast that he's been on that the longest player of a generation becomes the norm of the next. So if we're looking at a generation of players that are moving around at 190 ball speed plus, we're seeing golf courses that are going to have to go hundreds and hundreds of yards longer to remain competitive. We're then going to see those courses then will become the sort of poster child for other courses. The sustainability impacts are enormous, and it makes the game longer to play because you've got idiots like us that then turn up and play somewhere and then go to the back tees.
We don't do that. That we should actually.
You 100% do that, Bruce. That's all you do is go to the back tees.
You are the biggest. You are. I will pull you up on that, Bruce. You are the biggest candidate for going back. But
no, we don't all do. We don't always do that, though, do we?
No, we don't all do it, but we don't. We some of us always do it. But I
actually don't accept that. We played off the yellow tees. We had a great time, didn't we?
I'm jesting, but the point stands. When I say we, I mean we as golfers. We are tuned to going back to the back tees as frequently as possible. So I do think to say there is no problem there, for me that just doesn't wash. Like there is 100% a problem there. Yes, it is at the higher end of the game, but I think. I think if this means that course setup means that we start to remove some of those back tee boxes and we don't have to do long walks back from green sites as much, then I don't see that as being a massive failing. As a game, we would do way better from playing a box up most of the time. Like it's just, it's a sensible thing to do. That'd be my 2 pence anyway.
Question that I'd like to. Sam's had a question. I'm gonna pose a question. Do you think, in an effort to appease everybody, I'll phrase it differently. I don't think, in an effort to appease everybody, they've gone far enough in to affect the tour player, and they're going to affect the average player. Do you think in an effort to appease everybody, like there's just not enough impact here for the longer hitters?
Sorry, Tommy, are you suggesting that the average player is going to be more effective than the tour player?
No, I'm suggesting the average player will be affected because we've asked to be affected. And because of the inclusivity of everyone, I don't think it can have as big an effect on the top end that it needs to impact the game.
I think that's fair. I think if you broke golf down into different sports and said we're playing different sports, and we just took that as read, we could debate that till the cows come home. But the elite end of the game, you would be way more tight on the equipment. I suppose you could push it much further. But you're right. What we've had to settle for here is something that makes a dent in this, but it's by no means solving the whole thing, right?
Because if you wanted to solve, is 10 yards enough? For the 9 to 11 yards is what they're saying for.
Well, how can you start taking off people?
That was for, you said that was for 105 or 107 miles an hour club.
107, yeah.
Gordon Sargent's like 130. So it's going to be a bigger difference for him, you would think. It might be 50 for him. God, this just comes to me all of a sudden. going a little bit off piste here, but who's to say that it won't have a bigger impact for the likes of Gordon Sargent and Ludwig Aberg and Rory than 15 yards? We actually don't know until you sort of test it side by side, because we've heard these numbers and we won't actually know until it's tested side by side, really. And weirdly, you can only really get a good sense of it with the elite player because they're kind of the only players who actually hit the ball well enough, consistently enough, out the centre of the face with similar launch dynamics to be able to judge like a difference. But yeah, I think we're all in agreement that the professional game is just not as enjoyable or stimulating to watch as it could be. And the sort of importance of hitting the ball a long way has become a sort of overly important skill, and other skills have been diminished. Hitting the ball at the centre of the face has probably been diminished. Controlling spin on the ball has probably been diminished, like, shape with your driver and therefore your ability to hit the fairway. Controlling your trajectory and your spin with all your irons and your, long irons, mid irons, flighting that. And also being able to hit shots from around the green has been diminished because by definition, if you're hitting more wedges and shorter clubs in, you're going to miss fewer greens. So it has a knock-on effect the whole way through the bag. And yeah, like, 100%. The elite game needs to change. I think there's probably no better example of it than St Andrews last year in the Open, where they had 6-hour rounds because players were just driving greens and hitting the ball so far on baked fairways. And that's with a course that has actually, the Open course at St Andrews is pretty diabolical because you've lost all the flow of it because you're doing 50-yard walks back from one green to the next tee box, whereas you go and play it off the white tees and it's a great experience because you're just falling off one green to the next tee. There's so much to go at here though, but yeah, we're all in agreement on that.
But this won't, and I don't think that's the issue with this, and maybe that's touching on what you're saying, Tom, that this won't address that recalibration. I know Rory mentioned it in his infamous tweet, but it won't actually change the relative value of different skills like that, the ability to control spin. You look at the Tour Bellata that they were playing with in the 90s, like, it is a different beast. I think James was hitting some in the sim today and he told me, I can't keep the spin below 3,800 with the driver. And for context, I can't get my driver to spin above 2,000 with the current equipment. That's a massive change. So when we're not going into that depth of change, we can't accept to see a radically different product. I still think distance will carry a premium. The ball just won't go as far.
Yeah, I think interestingly, there was some tweets going out. I know this has been questioned, but if it is true, then, it's amazing that the Tour Bellata from 1990, wouldn't pass the current testing because it would, at that swing speed, it would go further than 317. Now, that may be true. If you nut a driver out the middle on a robot, you may get that to work. But keeping it on the planet with the spin that those things created is a really difficult skill. And that's why when Tiger first came out and was like nutting 300-yard drives with the Bellata, it's like, fuck me, that's a hyper impressive skill that's just that no one else could do.
He might have been on the Tour Professional by then, to be fair. I know exactly when that crossover came. There was a point where we came off Bellata and into a harder casing professional ball, which was that was a front runner to a Pro V. But you're right, the ball has improved so far since then, and he was playing a completely different game.
But it's interesting that spin hasn't been touched. I would have liked to have if someone said, what would you really like to see in a perfect world? I would have really liked to see a spinnier ball. And you can worry less then about how far it goes. Because if you can't keep the spin on the planet, it's like you can be 330 yards, but you'll be on a different bloody time zone.
And just touching on one more thing you said there, Bruce, you asked the question there about, essentially golf's become this wedge fest, this idea that it's just a massive case of like drive it long, wedge on. Doing that sort of chronological odyssey, as I called it, of the equipment rule changes and looking at some of the stuff that people had written about in, for over 100 years. I read the links by Robert Hunter. It's an ancient book. It's nearly 100 years old. And in there it says, of course, the ball has made such distances possible. And unless some regulation is devised, the ball will force us on and on in this mad race for yardage. This is nothing new we're looking at here. This is a latest spin on the conversation. Like we've constantly been looking at equipment and saying the ball's going too far, I would argue.
Yeah, and I think to your point earlier, Sam, it's not going to make all these courses relevant again. It's not going to make St Andrews, able to put the tees back to closer to like the white members tees and, deal with the problem of how far they hit the ball on these drivable par fours as they've become. But it's a stake in the ground, isn't it? Almost it's like a marker post, like, right, there you go. There's been a huge kind of tide of like the ball going further and unchecked distance and a change in the way the game is played. And it's like, right, we're actually going to stop this now. It's going to be a very moderate step that we're going to take, and then we'll be able to hopefully build on it going forward. That would be my hope, really. This is literally just a sort of opening salvo. It's a pretty moderate move at that. It's not going to have a huge impact, but it will hopefully pave the way to introducing some more sweeping radical change later down the line. I mean that's the thing. Well, I think that's what you do, isn't it? You wouldn't go taps back straight and be like, okay, everyone, ball's going too far. Let's go for a 320cc driver and back to a turbolator. It's like you'd be disowned. Liv would come in and be like, we're going to have our own governing body and regulations. The RNA and the USGA would lose all credibility. They wouldn't be able to deal with it. Like that's just, they're not going to be able to do that. They have to take a very, very moderate baby step because you've seen the reaction that this is generated, and we're sitting here saying it's probably not going to make much difference to us. It's probably not going to make much difference to the average golfer. It's probably not even going to make much difference to the elite player. And yet they're getting absolutely, panned for it.
When you say these guys are getting panned for it, I think it's quite interesting. I think it's an indictment of the world we're living in. You look back on some of these rule changes over the last 100 years, they were massive. I mean, for 60 years, the RNA and the USGA couldn't agree on the size of the golf ball for a kickoff. Like, they were huge sweeping differences on what was going on. 2005, like I remember the banned driver list. Like there were drivers that were going too far. They were now outlawed. You couldn't buy them. You could have literally bought a new driver that would have to go in the bin at the end of the year. You could not tee it up in a Saturday medal with it. Now, the difference was we didn't have social media in those days. So now we've got social media, and it's a fascinating glimpse into how different companies interpret and think about how they manage this stuff. The USGA put up their graphs. They've got torn to shreds on Instagram and Twitter. The RNA, the only post they put out in the last 2 days is a picture. And I'll try and show you on the screen. We'll put it in the show notes. But I thought it was quite ironic, actually. 2 days ago, it said, we decorate our tree at the RNA a little differently. And it's a picture of a tree covered in golf balls.
Yeah, that looks like one that's been.
It's all CGI'd and
it was scheduled a long time ago.
But it's it's definitely come out the scheduling thing, and someone's thought, God. But my point is, now you've got this pile-on culture of social media. You almost can't get away with anything. If they'd have gone the other way and said, we're going to do something with the ball and it's going to go 5% further, there would have been absolute outrage and backlash. And if they'd have said, we've thought about it for 7 or 8 months, we're going to do nothing, there'd be outrage and backlash. And you just didn't have that in a world where the rules were completely autocratic.
And there's just some woefully bad takes out there. So, Sam, you know, I feel like you've got a really good sense of it all. You've done some digging into the social media action. You mentioned one of them was it's a problem that doesn't exist for the vast majority of golfers. What are some of the other reasons that people have thrown out?
So there's a couple of really interesting points. So one person I saw put a really fair point on this. You're talking about going up tee boxes, but I'm playing from the front tee box and I'm struggling to carry it in certain holes. I think that lends a really good question. When I've walked the course with different architects, I've only ever noticed them walk it from the back tees. Just an interesting thought there. No one's actually really thinking about how far we could push tees forward in response to this point, because a lot of the backlash is coming from this isn't growing the game brigade. You know, this is making it harder to now take up golf.
Can I offer a quick counterpoint to that, though?
Of course you can.
At 70 mile an hour swing speed, I'm just going to go back to a previous stat. 72 miles an hour swing speed, you are likely to lose 1 yard. You know,
I think it was a broader point. It was a more general point.
I know, but I think we need to just make sure that if what is being issued is to be believed, that hopefully it won't impact that guy or lady, whoever it was.
Well, I think it's good because there's a couple of threads that I'll try and tie together really quickly here. One was this is going to disproportionately affect the higher handicappers. Per your comments, Tom, it shouldn't do in a distance sense, but the higher handicapper, their scoring starts to really tail up, doesn't it, from a higher yardage versus the lower handicapper that's a little bit more consistent, perhaps from 200. There's massive demand to see the list of the 30% balls. So in the announcement, it says they believe 30% of the balls currently on the market would actually pass these tests. Now, my guess is these would be the softer compound balls, with the super soft, the Strixon A333, whatever it's called.
Can I also add another point to that?
Yeah, of course.
I wouldn't go burning your golf balls just yet. Jan the 1st, 28 is when this was to be played in competition on the PGA Tour, and actually they're giving a 3-year exemption in non-competition play for you to just sort your shit out. So you've actually got until 2030 before you have to play this new ball. So I wouldn't go like, if you like the demand for this, what the 30% are like, I wouldn't go like lobbing all the Pro Vs in the drain. Like,
no,
I think you'll be okay.
You're right. You know, ironically, 100 years since Bobby Jones won the Grand Slam, he pretty much gave up after that year because steel shafts were becoming common in the game. He didn't want to learn how to play with steel shafts. Very high level summary reports, probably a more complex decision. There's a lot of talk in here about, I guess, people saying, you know, tour players, elite players playing better courses, closer mowing height, faster fairways on tour, they get more run. Now, it's so easy. We've done it for the last 30, 40 minutes on this podcast. We've talked about driver distance. The reality is the driver distance is near enough unimportant. What matters is the clubs that people are hitting into the greens with those approach shots, right? Because you're not really hitting a driver at the green that often. So I think the key thing here is when people say that about the firm ground conditions where they get run, if you're hitting more club into those greens and those conditions are firm, that will make a massive difference to how this plays out, because lower descent angle, less spin, more jeopardy with the hazards. All of a sudden, it brings precision right into focus again. You know, the most entertaining shot this year, Rory's 2-iron at Renaissance.
Yeah, I disagree. There's going to be a massive difference.
No, well, it's because it came up in conversation with a couple of people who all said the same. Now, they obviously listened to the Mike Clayton podcast and he said it, but it was a highly entertaining golf shot to watch.
But I disagree that it's going to make a massive difference. For the average PGA Tour player, they're going to lose 10, 11 yards. That's on their drive. So say they hit the ball 300 yards, now they're hitting it 290. If the hole's 450, now they've got a 160 approach instead of a 150 approach. So it might be a 7 instead of an 8.
But the 160 club's not going as far as the 150.
But it would be 10 yards shorter.
So this is where it's interesting. They actually explicitly mentioned, I think it was the equipment guy from the USGA said, for the elite player, it probably won't make a difference from their 5-iron down. Which is quite interesting.
Okay.
And
That is interesting.
He said for slower swing speed golfers, it might literally just be the driver that you're hitting shorter, and your woods and everything else will be the same. So again, conscious that we don't have an in-depth scientific knowledge of this, but I'm guessing it's to do with the compression of the ball and making a way that, you know, that compression at higher swing speeds or with a driver face will distort the ball more, and the ball will lose more yardage relatively. And then by the time you get down to a 5-iron, you know, because of the technology in the ball will be such that it won't make as big a difference.
Isn't this weird though? Because we're talking about a ball that, to my knowledge, hasn't been invented yet.
Yeah.
So like we're talking about what's going to happen. I don't know how they know this, because if you know if TaylorMade, Titleist, Callaway, if they haven't made the ball yet, then how do we know?
It'd be quite amusing, wouldn't it, if you're the RNA or the USGA, say, calling up Titleist, say, can you just make us a ball that complies with the ODS, but it's actually at 125 miles an hour, not 120? Can you just do that as a thought experiment? 5 years ago. Yeah,
but they say they had loads of people send them in. They literally said, we've had loads of balls already sent in for conformity testing. I'm like, why? It's gone 6 years. Max out the R&D a bit more. Don't waste your time.
Yeah.
Final bit, rough. You know, make it tougher from the tee. Make it tighter. Put more rough in. Increase the penalty. Now,
more trees.
Yeah, I mean...
Make the fairways wet. That was another one. Can you just make the fairways stop being wet?
Yeah, make them wet, and then the ball doesn't go far. Okay, great. Well, you know,
how's the sustainability argument looking now?
Exactly, sustainability. It destroys the way the course plays. It makes it a completely one-dimensional task. It reduces enjoyment. It's doing all the things except telling you on a TrackMan that the ball is going marginally further.
Do you know what I think they should do? I've said this before on this podcast. I'll say it again. I just think they should get rid of the woods out of the pro game altogether. You're allowed a 1-iron down, that's it. And then it's all solved, isn't it?
The irony is, though, and this just shows you what a great bloke he is Rory McIlroy's coming out and saying, let's get this skill back into the game. Like, you know, driving distance, the wedge fest, it's no good. Like, you know, we could see some more diverse player skill sets out here winning if we just address this issue. And that's coming from the best driver in the world for the last 20 years, probably. Maybe you could go back further. Maybe you could say until, you know, he's the best driver since Greg Norman. And there he is saying, this is actually makes sense. It's for the good of the game.
Well, I actually think he's saying that because it benefits him. Like, let's not think this is altruistic. Like, the dude is the best driver of the golf ball, and everybody else can swing as hard as they like, hit any part of the club face. You know, it's like, I can't remember. Was it Riviera where Cam Young was like all over the map and still like nutting out there like 180 ball speed? And it was like, you know, if you can be all over the face and just swing out your boots, it doesn't really matter. Like Richie Ramsey said in this podcast before, there is no premium to hit the center of the club with a driver. Like,
no, if anything, it goes further off center. But yeah, I mean, there's no reason to believe that Rory won't still be an outstanding driver of golf ball based on this. And like you say, if you made it tougher, you'd play to his strengths. You know,
I don't know if you would, because yeah. You know, he's still going to be a better driver of the golf ball than other people. But, like, you know, that has been his strength. He's driving the ball a long way. And you can say, yeah, it's easy. Anyone can hit it wherever they want to on the face. He's still been the best driver on tour for 20-odd years. And if it was that easy...
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying like, he'll find the center of the face. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, like... Other tour players, they can hit anywhere on the face and swing as hard as they like because it's so forgiving. They're being rewarded. Where actually you take that tech away, and all of a sudden, Rory just comes even better. You know?
Yeah, but he's not. You know, he's not hitting as many short irons. Okay, he's not been great with the wedges, so maybe hitting the more long irons, he'd have a relative advantage there.
Oh, great for him. Yeah, take the wedges out of his hand. He might start winning some majors.
He'll have some longer putts.
We get so wedded to talking about the elite game straight away there. You know, I would be really curious to know what it was like in the 80s or whatever, when people had had to go from playing the marble into the bigger ball. Imagine how big a difference that was compared to this. We are almost, it's not going to be as straightforward as, in 6 years' time, we flip over to 2030 and then we go, oh yeah, this ball doesn't go quite as far, but that's a noticeable drop off in distance. I'm going to be like 40. I'm going to be 44 when I've got to play this golf ball. I'm going to be bleeding yardage by then anyway. I'll be used to losing it year on year.
And you've just got a built-in excuse.
Exactly.
It's the ball.
But can you imagine like that difference is so minor compared to British golfers who were holding on to the small ball for decades. And then it was like, yeah, you've got to play the 1.68 now. Can you imagine the difference? I mean, the distance differential in that compared to this was enormous.
That's the hustle would have looked huge.
And I did not hear. I haven't read any articles from this late 80s saying we just can't get people into the game of golf now because people aren't hitting this marble thing 350 yards.
That's where it's ridiculous, though, isn't it? Yeah, and we're all. I think it's fair to say there's a consensus on this podcast that we'd have loved for the R&A and the USGA to have gone further and been bolder. And as you say, like they did with the drives in 2005, say like, no, it's done. Like that ball is out. You've got to start playing a new ball by the end of the year. Like, fuck off. It's done. That would be quite amazing in a way. Obviously, it would be, it would backfire massively. But yeah, I'd love it if they brought in a new golf ball in 2 years, and then in another, I don't know, year after that, or actually more recently, quicker than the ball introduction, if they just said, yeah, you know what, we're just going to do away with the 460cc driver and we're going to go down to 400 or 380. It's like, that's the kind of bold change that we'd
in 3 weeks' time, all manufacturers would have to provide 350cc driver.
And just say like, bang, get it sorted. Yeah, I know you've got your product line sorted for the next 5 years, but like, it's done.
It'd be great though if the manufacturers were all primed. Like, that's it. We're good to go. Tomorrow, they're all out.
Okay. Let's wrap this up with a question that I want you both to answer. Who are the winners and losers of this?
I would say the ball companies have potential to win. It's a massive change. So the opportunity to steal market share here is huge.
I would say I would say the winners is the game of golf and everyone who plays it. I know that the R&A and the USGA get bashed, particularly the R&A. They get bashed for being like superior beings and they're just so like tucked up in their ivory towers and they just think they're better than us. And who are they to tell us what we need? Governance is bloody hard. Not that I know from personal experience, but governance is really hard. And making decisions like this, you're going to be unpopular. But I genuinely think they've done it for the good of the game of golf. And I do think it's going to have a positive impact. So actually, I'd say hats off to them. Like, it's not been a big and bold and brave change, but let's be realistic. I don't think that was feasible. And I think it's a good step in the right direction.
I think they've had to do it. I don't think they can win. I think who wins and who loses. Yeah, I think the game would be better for throttling it back a bit.
Who loses the most from this?
I think the governing bodies, ironically, have to lose a load of points from the golfing public. The sentiment's not positive. It'll disappear. It'll go into sort of become a bit of white noise for a few years, and then gradually balls will just get changed over, and it'll be seamless by the time we get to 2030, and it'll all have been a bit of a hoo-ha for a long time. So I do think it takes a lot to go into that. They've got enough market analysis on this to know this is not going to land well. So to go in and face that full on, big winner here is, it should be golf courses, and there should be some wins here from a sustainability point of view with courses. Not have, there should be, it should help prevent the need to keep lengthening courses,
Yeah,
at huge cost.
I would offer a counter argument to say, I understand what you're saying about the winners being golf balls. I actually think some golf ball manufacturers we could see them going bankrupt or stop creating balls. Like if you are a look, I don't know the position that Vice golf balls live in, the space that they live in. But if you're a Vice that don't have gazillions to throw at R&D, and you've spent, the best part of 5-6 years doing, creating a really good golf ball, whatever they do, it's like, oh, now we've got to start again, have we? That can't be an easy task.
I do think that I agree. And I do think that the equipment manufacturers are in lockstep with the governing bodies, really. I think that would be an observation here is, that they've clearly got a significant seat at the table. They've all sort of come out and pretty much supported this today. They were dead against it in March. There's been a consultation period. There's been an agreement. Be my two penneth. Perhaps is that this is what we think is right, and I think the equipment manufacturers will get on board. Yeah, and a Vice golf ball has probably not got really a seat at the table on that. And the R&D spend on this stuff is killer, isn't it?
Yeah, fill me in on that, though, Sam. What do you mean they've come out and they've all supported it?
I wouldn't say they've been okay. Maybe I've been rash in saying they supported it, but what the response in March was toys out of the pram across the board. Do you remember? It looked, it was just toys out of the pram, massive PR stuff going up on social media, leveraging all their players to speak out against it. Now, by and large, the players have kind of fallen into line a little bit with it. There's no massive sort of discord with the manufacturers, or certainly not as much of it. It seems to be more. And the fact that it's gotten leaked last week would tell me the equipment manufacturers had a pretty good citer on it.
Yeah, and also Jeff Shack's released his quad. It came out, quite soon after the announcement. Reading it earlier on, he cites the CEOs of Bridgestone, Callaway, TaylorMade, all coming out in support of the decision. So, in terms of endorsements, I think it's got a kind of a nod from most of the major manufacturers.
I have a question.
Okay. Can I answer one more? My winner. I think my winner could be the average, the less than average tour guy, like your Zach Johnson. Like, if that ball rampage is like it actually is like a thing, and you're taking a lot of yards off the bigger hitters and not so much off the middle hitters, we might see the return of the patter. I think that might be a thing.
There will be no chance you'll see that. But it'd be great if Zach Johnson won something this year, wouldn't it? It'd be great if he had something to celebrate. Maybe this is a silver lining on a very dark cloud year for him. One idea seems to have a lot of traction online, and that is regulating and therefore shortening tee peg height.
You peg it up low anyway, Sam.
Yeah, I still can't spin the drive with it, but that seems to have, like, really. Do you know what? Someone said to me it's Faldo's idea.
I've heard Tiger mention it. I've heard Peter Dawson mention it. Yeah, Faldo's mentioned it too.
What's the thought? What's the theory? You can't hit up on it.
You can't hit up on
it. So the only reason you can get these launch characteristics is because you can get right under the ball. You remember me at Brora?
I don't specifically remember you at Brora, no.
I was trying to hit about 9 degrees up on it. I mean, I hit a stone cold top in the end. But
yes, I very much remember you at Brora.
The past captain came out and said, "Yeah, oh hi, you're the cookie jar guys. I've heard you're half decent players." And Sam's like, "Yeah, watch this drive." Yeah,
straight into James Braid's undergrowth.
Because again, there's a kind of a view that if you hit the ball slightly higher in the face, you can take spin off it as well. Thoughts as to why, Stenson could kind of get into a driver at certain points in his career was by almost hitting it deliberately high and out the toe, take the spin off it. So yeah, the limiting the tee height would help that. I just would like to see a much smaller driver head. I don't know why, but that, having a hit with Persimmon at West Byfleet a month and a half ago was a pretty eye-opening experience.
Humbling.
We don't need to go back to that level, obviously, because it'd still be titanium, but just something a bit smaller, like 460 cc's is crazy.
Yeah, but these guys can absolutely wail on a 3-wood. Like, they can mutilate a 3-wood. Like, so I don't think it'd make a massive impact. Like, I'd say from the big... with both of those things, if you took tee height down and made a smaller head, say the biggest head was a 3-wood size, They're still nutting it out there like 300 yards, some of them with a 3-wood.
This is where, like, I
Not
think
hitting
the Persimmon stuff. Well, we did that great.
Rahm recently hit like a 285. He was 285 into the green or something like that. But it's got on with a 3-wood. It's like,
no.
Yeah, you can do that.
Stuff.
But that's a different, mate. That's a different level to hitting a drive 370 or 400. I mean, you do see a number of drives over 400 yards on the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour each season. Now, yeah, you can say it's downhill or it's like wind assisted, but you're not hitting that distance with a 3-wood. Like the drop off from driver to 3-wood in terms of distance and just, the launch conditions that underpin that difference is significant.
For what it's worth, like watching the Shell's Wonderful World of Golf stuff, seeing them, getting mishits and the difference that makes and off-center strikes, and I buy it to a point. The top 50 players in the world, like they are so good with their ball striking. I don't think it make a massive difference. But I think if you did that, and it wasn't a bifurcation play, i.e., everybody would then have to abide by those rules. It's just so hard then at the higher end of handicaps. I imagine my mum then having to play with a persimmon-sized driver head. Like that's hard, isn't it? I mean, I can't say I'd wish that on my mum for her golf. My mum's but like, I'm not joking. My mum's a solid player. She played for 30, 40 years. But she needs some help to make some carries and to make the game feel moderately easier. I can't honestly say I'd advocate for a persimmon-sized driver head if that's a lock stock rule. Now, if we put a bifurcation in, make it mega small, stick them around some real high tariff stuff, and you got the most entertaining product imaginable, provided the higher handicap hasn't got to play it.
Yeah, if they can play 400 cc, that's why I'd say that's like a reasonable middle ground, perhaps. But I don't know. I've not thought that idea through fully. And yeah, as you said, really what we're coming back to is bifurcation, which was what was offered in March and was turned down.
And look, this is just a very gradual adjustment. There's lots of other variables that go into distance, aren't there? We don't really see it over here, but altitude makes a massive difference all over the world with how far the ball goes. The ground conditions is massive. We played on Sunday. We played off the back tees. It was a cold day and the ground was a little softer than it would otherwise be. And the course felt monstrously long to when I've normally played it. These things make much bigger differences day to day, and the course setup. The course manager's got the keys to the kingdom here. Like they don't, if they want to stretch it out and add a few shots to the round, they can do that with pin positions and stretching it out, and they can be more generous. So I think that the idea that this is just going to be just like some wholesale thing that you're going to hit 2 extra clubs into every green, just to me doesn't feel right.
As you would say, it doesn't stack up, does it, Sammy?
Well, we've got a few years to work it out. It'll be interesting to see when the golf balls start getting developed and put them, available for purchase. I'm sure there'll be a very interesting time.
Will Bruce be bowled by the time that comes into play?
Yeah, it looks like it's creeping a bit, doesn't it? But yeah, good chance. I might just have to,
7 years. I think it'll be all right.
Jump before I'm pushed, Sammy, like you did. The early stages of cookie jars is great going back to and seeing that when you had the little bits around the side and a little bit of fluff on top, and then halfway through 2020 just razzed it, didn't you? Or was it
Zoom was the death of me. It was just like looking at a box of eggs every time I joined a Zoom meeting. I just couldn't.
Can I just on a bit of a tangent? I'm actually shocked that only 75% of people who follow us on Instagram.
No, I'm not.
I thought it would have been like 90.
No,
95%.
You're out of touch. I think this is overwhelmingly regarded as a bad move by general golfers. Like general golfers think this is an annoyance, a hindrance, and a bit of bad news. And yeah, I think we've got a more sympathetic audience to it because maybe there's a touch of nostalgia in there, and people. I think there's always this thing of like, the real sort of nerds and the real sort of golf junkies, want to see this go all the way back. Let's go right back to sort of 1972 with it. We've got to be a bit pragmatic as well. Like I think we've had a few messages from people saying smaller driver heads, spinning, tee it down, learn to be ball strikers. It's like you say, you've got to think practically and not think about. You can't look at the spectrum of golfers being Bruce Fitzpatrick, Sam Williams, and Tom Mills. There is a lot more that goes. We're
That's
just
quite a wide
middle of the
spectrum,
road. It is a wide spectrum, but
we're martyrs, though, aren't we? And there's a lot of people who follow us who are martyrs. Like, roll the ball back.
Yeah.
Get the balata in the bag, small tee, persimmon. I'm not going to be able to hand in a scorecard because I'm not actually going to be able to hole out. But that's the game I want to play.
Yeah, that's the game my mum wants to play. My mum wants a persimmon head, balata,
handicap, stroke plate is vulgar. Let's just go back to match play as well.
Any other parting thoughts on this, gents?
Negative.
No, although rumour has it there may be the odd Tour Balata at Urban Golf making an appearance on Friday night, which is obviously, something that we're all very much looking forward to. Christmas party.
Yeah, well, it'll be a great evening. Can't wait. It's going to be very busy. It's a very busy night in London now with a hell of a lot of people coming. So, genuinely concerned about fire safety regs at Urban Golf on Friday night.
Let's keep those under wraps, though. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I hope that you've listened and learned and enjoyed the discussion. And until next time.
Adios.
Watch this.